On your mark. Get set, go.
I got love for my brothers. I got love for my brothers.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 3. It's your brother Jamey. Welcome to a show where you can expect uploads every Tuesday. Focus is holding space for people to take their power. And it's a power available to every single person on the face of this earth, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've come from. All of us are qualified to be free. I told you guys in episode 2 that this episode would be special doesn't cut it. But for a lack of a better word, that I would be recording in a place very sacred to me. And I told you that I would share details of my story from this place. You know, with anything sacred, sharing becomes interesting. I remember my wife, she said it to me during this particular time in our lives. As a pastor, I always looked to lead with ultimate vulnerability, at least with as much vulnerability as I knew how to express. But the trouble sometimes with transparency is we can only be as transparent as we are with ourselves. I can only be as honest with you as I am with me. But if I lie to myself, how can I know whether I'm telling you the truth or not? I can never tell you the truth if I lie to myself. And so for me, as a pastor, as a leader, it's always been my aim to bleed first. And I don't say that in any kind of corny way. I mean it in the most gruesome, realistic sense. But what that became is vulnerability can become a character where I'm the vulnerable guy. And there isn't necessarily anything wrong with acting. I'm an actor. Everyone's an actor. You listen to that famous speech from Marlon Brando, and he says acting is a survival mechanism. All of us use it. All of us play characters. Our personality is a mask that we created in order to survive in this world. And the one that I created for a period of time was a mask of honesty. A character that played vulnerability. And that doesn't mean that I wasn't vulnerable. But I would share everything. I'll share borderline everything outside of my marriage and intimacy between Tay and I really always tried to overshare. I remember even preaching this. I used to say, I've done my job if I go home wondering if I overshared, wondering if I shared too much. But over time, when you hold on to a personality, you hold on to a way of being, eventually it becomes enslaving. So when I stopped pastoring and we move out here to the mountains, this is double the elevation of Denver. And it's a real mountain community with mountain folk. But the transparency thing just was a bit weird. Just didn't land the same way it used to for me. And I'll never forget, she said, my wife, she's the wisest person I know. And I don't say that in any kind of patronizing way. I mean that to my core. I very much trust my wife's gut. It is the ultimate compass in a lot of ways. But she said, if everything is shared, nothing is sacred. If everything is shared, nothing is sacred. And in a lot of spiritual places, you see people that really fight against any type of separation or meaning or defining or limits. In the last episode, I talked about the story of when I tried to raise my brother Savon Jordan from the dead. And when I couldn't, immediately my mission began to find power. The power to do that. The power to raise the dead. Put it as plainly as I can put it. And so after that, after he died, I was in a very interesting spot because the way I intend to lead is through radical vulnerability, through modeling. But the way you model is purely by being, allowing yourself to be seen. And I felt that so many people in the American popular society, grief is very hidden. It's not so much sackcloth and ashes of us all doing a parade down a street, sobbing, weeping. It's not like in a lot of other cultures where the expression of grief is there's no hiddenness to this. So I felt that at the time, the most important thing I could do was continue to remain authentic. But that's a messy thing as a leader. That's a messy thing. Because with grief, at least my grief, there comes a permission to feel. There's an invitation to a realm of emotions that are attached to love. Most people don't associate anger and love because a lot of us have seen very unhealthy expressions of anger. But it's not so much that anger is good or bad. It's more so, what do you do with your anger? There was something, and this isn't original with me, but one of the only stories that we see where Jesus is said to be angry. And in this story, his anger does not destroy, his anger heals people. So the question isn't so much, is anger good or bad? It's more so, how do you use anger? But for me, I've never been the angry guy. Part of my persona is, hey, how you guys doing? Light. Keep it light. Keep it light. Keep it light. Make sure everything's peaceful all the time. You know, that was just the personality I subconsciously or consciously chose to inhabit, express myself through. So I had never allowed myself to be angry. I'd never been angry. No way. No way. But suddenly after Savan, I felt this anger. I felt rage. For the first time, I felt searing rage. And that's a very high energy frequency. Rage is a heightened form of anger. But notice when we feel angry, part of the reason a lot of us are afraid of anger is that it's so action taking. It's different than sadness. For a lot of us, at least for myself, sadness take you out. Sadness isn't something that allows a lot of room for action. Sadness will put you down on the couch, put you in bed for days. But anger, nah, I can do something. Yeah, no, I can do something. And then rage, talk about stillness. What is there to be still for when you're angry? It's interesting, I think of that verse that the anger of man and the righteousness of God. The anger of man does not work the righteousness of God. But then I think a question begs to be asked, does God feel anger? Is anger a natural, healthy human emotion? And I would say, when it comes to things like injustice, when it comes to things like gross atrocities that we see in life. This is why in episode 1, you'll see me reference certain spiritual ideas, quote unquote spiritual ideas, where people will just throw things out like it is what it is. That's fluffy in certain environments. Sure, you can say that from a certain standpoint, but being exposed to certain environments and situations could go so deep here. And I guess I should say trigger warning with anger. And with any of the pieces of content I'm putting out, I probably should put out a trigger warning because I'm really not looking to fluff this. I'm really never looking to just give you some type of lemon meringue pie. That was good. Yo! Even though lemon meringue pie, I used to like it. I know some people are like, it feels like snot. It's the texture. I don't know if I love lemon meringue pie like I used to. Maybe that's a bit of a psychopathic thing to like lemon meringue pie. I was talking about something so serious. At least it felt like it. But I shared my anger to the utmost. I didn't hide. At least as much as I knew how to be unhidden. There were certainly parts of my life that were hidden. But at that point in time, to what I was aware of, I was as naked as I could be. I was as vulnerable as I could be. So, angry leader is a very interesting thing to watch. Because for a lot of people, it can feel very unsafe. It all compounded because George Floyd, about 3 months later after Savon dies, George Floyd is killed about 15, 20 minutes away from our church. And so you're in the midst of everything that transcribes after, at least a lot of what transcribes after. And as a church, we really did our best to have boots on the ground, to be in it, not just talk about it. And so it was interesting as a church and as for myself personally, because with Savon, I was already angry because I felt like I was on the search for what was misaligned with myself. Because it's not God's will that he died. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Then that applies to everybody. Then no one is exempt from that. Then please, when it comes to saying that anyone believes in the literal Bible, literalness of the Bible, I think why I became so angry was I grieved. There were a lot of leaders around me at the time who I held them to a certain standard. I kind of thought we would all be on the same page there. Because we believe God can heal people. We believe God can raise the dead. We believe that that's part of what it means to believe in the Bible for us. It's not a matter of interpretation. Like, you believe this. And as a matter of fact, we believe that Jesus told you to do this. But what I found was a lot of voices around me that I held. They were kind of my heroes. A lot of them suddenly seemed to back out when the game was on. I felt like I saw, in reality, you don't actually believe what you say you believe. When the game gets on, you're going to sit on the bench. You're not going to be in the morgue with me. And I understand a lot of people would say that's very extreme. Very extreme. But at the moment, that was how I processed that. In a way, some serious victim mentality from me at that point. But that was the moment, though, where I will stand alone if I have to. I'm alone in this. And there was a small group of people who were on that same endeavor with me. My brother Thomas, who will bring on a lot of people. So it's not everybody, but it was the majority. So I gave myself permission to trust whatever came after. But I'm going to stay vulnerable. I'm going to stay vulnerable. I'm going to stay as honest as I can be. And given that comes with the preface, mask of honesty leaves lots of room for lies. I remember just looking at my church, because my church just started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking due to COVID, and some of it because I was losing my mind. I looked insane. 100%. It was like suddenly my perspective of God, my perspective of everything that I thought I knew, I had to let go of in an instant. And it was wild because as the city of Minneapolis burned, it was such a reflection of everything that was really happening in my personal life. It seemed like everything was just on fire. And I think a lot of us resonate with that. I felt alone in it, but there were a lot of people on that same journey. So eventually my church shuts down. Just can't sustain it. Can't sustain it financially. We're in a public bus terminal. There's so much going on. People's lives are falling apart. I can't keep myself together. I'm preaching these wild God versus empire messages. I'm like an old fire and brimstone reversed, though. Like fire and brimstone on the empire. The United States of America is falling. Like, because part of what the U.S. is founded upon, said to be, is some type of Christian value. Some one nation under God. We throw that word around, and God is more of a nationalistic figure than it is a reality. And all throughout history, it's always been, it has never been God versus oppressed people. If there's anything that God seems to be opposed to, it is whatever kind of mindset is behind oppression in empires, which is why there has never been an empire that has sustained itself forever. Every empire has fallen. And so at the time, I was reckless. I was so reckless. I mean, I just... But it was because I loved him. It's because I loved Savon. And that's what I mean about honoring our emotions, feeling our emotions, not running from them. Because these are literal sources of energy in your body. That's why medical science, we're starting to pick more up on the density of emotions. Literal energetic density. Next time you feel a very strong emotion, notice the density of it. Some types of therapy will practice this. Notice, is there a shape to the emotion in your body? Start to become aware of that, and you start to notice how much energy is behind these emotions. Which is very, very biblical. I know I always bring it back to this, but the thing is, one of the only times you ever see Jesus raise someone from the dead, immediately before that, it says that Jesus weeps. It was for his friend named Lazarus. Lazarus dies. He's been dead 3 days. He shows up, and Lazarus' sisters are like, you should have been here earlier. And it says that Jesus weeps. When's the last time you wept? I mean, really let it go. But immediately after, he weeps, full of that energy. Full of that energy. See, that's part of, with Savon, that's been a fascinating thing, is because I let no emotion into the process of attempting to raise him from the dead. I let no emotion in. None. The way that I knew how to heal people was by approaching it militantly. Don't even acknowledge death. Don't even acknowledge the cancer. Don't acknowledge the sickness. Just don't let emotion in at all. Emotion plays no piece of this. But when that didn't work, I said, okay, let's allow these emotions that I haven't really allowed myself to feel. Let's start to play with these things. So like I was saying, after the church shuts down, I'm in a wild place because my wife and I, we don't really know what else to do other than take one step forward. But we feel this so strongly. We see this vision somewhere. But how to get to that vision, I don't really know what to do other than we're going to sell our house. We're going to sell almost all of our possessions. We're going to renovate a camper, and we're going to travel around. We're going to live in the camper. And then maybe we'll try building some Airbnbs, and we'll just kind of allow the Airbnbs to start to build up the income as we just continue to live on the road. I know it probably sounds insane. Maybe all of this sounds insane. Probably all of this, bro. Probably all of this. I understand if it does. I totally understand. I wouldn't blame you for saying that. So we did. We renovated an Airstream, and for those of you, that was when we started our YouTube channel. We started vlogging. And it was on that journey where, boy, your brother got exposed. Woo! Whoa. It was like God took that entire experience and said, oh, you're the honest guy? You're the honest guy? Your name is James. You know what James means? Replacement through deception. Inherently, my name means to lie. From one angle, you could say my name means liar. That's a convenient mask. The honest guy, that's a convenient mask, baby, when your name means liar. Oh, you're so honest with yourself, Jamey, aren't you? You're so honest. Huh. Well, let me take you up here. Let me take you up here. And let me show you how honest you really are. I used to talk a lot about grace. For any of you who have followed me since I was little. A long time, all I preached was the grace of God. God's undeserved favor. We don't hear much about that anymore, do we? Humans have never heard much about that. That's always been a small strain of a message. But if you have the ears to hear it, it'll shake everything. It wasn't until I made it out here, after 6 months of the Airstream, getting absolutely exposed, that I realized the grace I had always preached about and talked about wasn't as much grace as much as it was excuses. Grace is not an excuse. Grace does not need to lie in order to extend itself to you. And that grace, man, even when I talk about it, it feels like honey. It feels so sweet. Grace and truth are not separate. Until you're willing to tell the truth, there is no room for grace. It's not until you look your darkness straight in the face. A famous psychologist, Carl Jung, I'll try not to quote just only white guys on here. A lot of controversy surrounding Carl Jung as well, but sometimes controversy just means you're effective. Carl Jung said something one time in a very famous speech he gave to clergymen. He was a psychologist, and Carl Jung, he said, essentially, paraphrasing, when Christ said, "Whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me," what happens when we look in the mirror and we found out that the least of these is none other than myself? That, as Charles Spurgeon said, the enemy is in me. That it's never been me against a separate devil. It's never been me against a separate force. It's always been me against myself. Then what? What if loving Christ is extended by loving the least of these? But what happens when we are the least of these? What happens when I am the greatest liar in the room? What happens when I am the greatest cheapskate in the room? What happens when I am the grimiest, slimiest? And to some people that might sound self-deprecating, but the truth of the matter is, I don't trust anybody who's not aware of your darkness. I don't trust anybody who's not aware of your propensity and your capacity to harm, to do damage, to manipulate. The goodness I used to know as goodness is nothing more than naivety. True goodness exists in people who goodness is a choice. When I am aware of my capacity to do evil, to destroy, to lie. I don't trust the good guys, man. Don't you? That's why our society, look at us. We all feel that. That's why we're more into the anti-hero than we are the hero. Because the hero, what are you hiding? What are you hiding? Oh, you're the good guy. Let me spend a week with you like I do in my crisis work. Yeah. Let me be by you for 24 hours and we'll find out, are you a good guy? Look at me, all this sass today. Whoo! Mountain brings it out of me. Getting sassy today. But I mean it. I mean it. That was me. One of the nicknames I had in high school was Golden Boy. And essentially what Golden Boy means is, in a way, it's not so much that you're trying to manipulate. As a matter of fact, I'm not even aware that I can manipulate. I'm naive. I'm a child. That's why the best people I know are some of the messiest. Some of the most complicated. It's not the guys who just seem to have whitewashed walls. Let me look behind the wall. I'm sure we'll find some black mold. Maybe the grace left when the honesty left. And it's a scary thing to say that because I'm not aware of where I'm hiding. Grace is undeserved favor. Which means the only way you can disqualify yourself from it is if you think you deserve it. There's a lot of that in our spiritual culture, isn't there? Even outside of Christianity, it's always like, you deserve happiness, do you? I'm sorry, as your brother, maybe it's just me, but do you? You deserve to have everything you want. Sure, I would say that in a roundabout way, everyone does. But let me ask you, why do you deserve it? Why do you deserve it? Well, 'cause please tell me. I deserve it because I'm a good guy? Uh-oh. I deserve it because I'm the most unselfish person I know, says the most selfish people we know. I deserve it because I'm the most self-aware person I know, says the most unself-aware people we know. I deserve it because I just always. Tell me where you lie to yourself. I found this in my work. The first thing I'm looking for is the first little moral high ground someone stands on. There's the first lie every single time. Every single time. I'm not even lying to you. For a second, I started to wonder if I was crazy. And you might be like, you kind of are, based on the stories you told. 100%. Maybe. But there's this pattern every single time in crisis work where it's like first thing someone says. My son, he knows he's so loved, says the mom who physically abuses her son. No, I'm just built different, says the guy who's always sick. We use certain statements to hide behind. And I'm no exclusion of that. That's why the honesty mask was such a convenient mask for the man who's named liar. If I was working on crisis support for myself, after Savon dies, or even in the midst of me pastoring my church. The minute I would have heard myself say, I'm just always looking to be vulnerable, I would have just got you. Oh, Jamey, are you? Let's explore your honesty, shall we? And it's a terrifying thing to do, to face your own darkness. But the beauty is, I feel there's so many people right now that are talking about shadow work, but I think something we forget is the shadow is not a part of yourself that is bad or evil. The shadow is the part of yourself that you repress or do not acknowledge, that you are not aware of. Because in reality, in the truth of what all of us are, the darkness is still light. There's light in the darkness. Part of the reason I love my work in crisis support is I'm given the opportunity to work with some people that people call monsters. And the moment I go in there, I'm so grateful I get to, because I get to prove yet again there's light in every darkness. There are no monsters. I have not supported one guy who has not been valid in some regard. That in the very heart of every human being. That's why when we talk about psychopaths, we say psychopaths have the inability to feel emotion, to feel sympathy. And we say something like someone's born like that. But it is impossible for me to extend sympathy to you if I have not given or received sympathy myself. It's not hard to exhibit, and that's the thing as well. Some of the most anti-narcissists I know are the most narcissistic people you will ever meet. Beware the anti-narcissist. Beware. Do we not all have a little bit of a lack of grace that we extend to other people? Do not every single one of us watching this have some part of ourselves where we hold others to a certain standard that we even live up to? And so that's why I say grace is not really something you touch until you look darkness straight in the face, until you look your propensity and your capacity to lie, to do harm, to steal, to do all of the things that you call bad. We really think we're better. This was something that I think I became very frustrated with in 2020, because there was a word called deconstruction being thrown around a lot. And deconstruction was essentially grief. It was essentially dismantling everything you thought you knew and unlearning it. But then the thing was, once you deconstruct, you're going to have to reconstruct, which is a beautiful, incredible process. You're going to have to rebuild. But there are some people who you burn it all to the ground, but okay, it's all burnt now. What now? But the thing is that sometimes these terms become things we hide behind, like deconstruction. Or I think something very popular to say right now is that nothing matters. A lot of the younger guys that I work with in my work, I notice this with a lot of Gen Zers, that there's kind of this propensity to just lean towards what you might call nihilism on one angle, but it's more so just nothing matters. And honestly, 100% valid. Given your experience, I see completely why you would see it that way. But take it all the way. Go all the way with nothing mattering, because what we find in the end is that nothing is still something. The same way that you can't leave nothing unquantifiable in math, so you have to create zero. But how do you quantify nothing? There's room for grace for everybody. There's no one that's disqualified from undeserved favor, because all of us are perfectly imperfect. That's why we can confidently say you're perfect, but you don't really come to recognize that perfection until you come to recognize those things you used to call imperfect. You used to call bad. You used to say you were better than. And I think a large part of what this place meant to me is finding out you're better than nobody. Boy, you're better than nobody. Have you ever heard that quote? That the first step to greatness and being special is recognizing you're not great and you're not special. That's what this place was in a lot of ways. There's a lot I don't want to share about this because it was very intimate. And I could play the honest guy thing and be like, no, yeah. I'm the vulnerable guy. I spill all my stuff. A large part of the reason why I didn't do this podcast for a long time is I do see mystery as a gift. It's funny after what I was just saying, because now I'm wondering if I actually do believe that. Maybe I don't treasure mystery as much as I think I do, but I can say confidently in this moment, this is a mystery that I do treasure. This place and what it means to me. So there are a lot of details I want to keep to myself because they're intimate. You know that feeling where if you shared it, you would taint it. That's why I do just want to prep you with the content. This is the first time I've ever really allowed myself to start putting out content on such a regular basis to the audience that is the internet. And rather than playing the honest card or putting on the honest mask, I can honestly say there's a lot I'm going to keep to myself. Because I want to give you something different. I told you last week, I don't want to give you fast food. I don't want to give you a flash bang in the pan. I want to give you something you can live off of. But part of what you can live off of is something that empowers you to engage with life, to live better than you talk. And I do want that. I want to model something more than I talk about something. I saw a black cat yesterday. It was so weird because it was starting to snow. I haven't seen a black cat in a long time. But I was dumping trash off at the mountain dump out here. And I see a black cat. And it was the weirdest thing because I noticed myself notice it. It wasn't just that I noticed the black cat, it was that I noticed myself noticing the black cat. And it was the oddest thing. Because immediately I'm like, a black cat is such a weird thing to see, especially in white winter up here where it's snowing a lot. It was a wild image. So I looked up, it's interesting. Because a black cat carries a lot of mystery to it, a lot of mystique, a lot of meaning. There was a theory for a long time that black cats were witches in disguise. They symbolize bad luck. But if you were in Japan or Korea, if you see a black cat, it means good luck. And I found it such an interesting thing. Cat, so seeing a black cat 3 times in a day. But it's fascinating that I could interpret that event. I could interpret that event in several different ways. Infinite different ways in reality, but based on common consensus, popular consensus, I could take that event and interpret it as good luck or bad luck, or I could take a detached approach and say, well, no, this is actually just coincidence. Go about my day. But part of what's fascinating to me is it reminds me that interpretation is experience. It's not just that interpretation of our story creates experience. It's that our interpretation is our experience. Because what happens if I go then and I say, oh, I saw a black cat 3 times in a day. Bad luck, bad luck. And I start looking for bad luck. But not only is the looking for bad luck in a way bad luck, but the looking for bad luck is an experience in and of itself. It's not just that our interpretation of events changes our mental state. It's that our interpretation changes our entire state of being, which we would call experience. And so that was part of what was fascinating about preparing for this, is there's so many different ways I could interpret what it meant for my wife and I to disappear into the mountains for 3 years. I could tell this story lots of different ways. I could interpret this as the place I got sober. I could interpret this as the place I faced my darkness, that I experienced real true grace for maybe the first time, that I experienced, or maybe a heightened level of grace that I've never experienced. Or this is the place where I healed, or this was the place where I realized I was a liar, or this was a place that I could interpret this event, this, in an infinite amount of ways, infinite amount of options of how I frame this story. But what gets me is the moment we recognize we can't change events, we can only change our interpretation. That is the moment where we gain the power of story. When we ask ourselves the question, what is this? What is Jamey Hammond doing right now? What is it? It's interesting because that question, what is it, in the Torah, there's a story when the people of Israel leave Egypt, the place they had once depended on. They then become dependent on another source, the divine source, God. But it's interesting because when your paycheck isn't coming in on time all the time, and you're walking in a completely unfamiliar, unknown space, the solution to that from the divine was to give a food that was bread form called manna. But what's interesting about manna is the word manna means, what is it? What is it? Think about the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our what? Our daily bread. But what's our daily bread? It is an opportunity to frame, what is it? What is the story that I'm living? Even for me, what am I doing right now? Am I recording a podcast for what? Am I trying to entertain people? The more you can clarify what is it, the more you become creative in the ownership of your experience, because your interpretation is your experience. And sometimes we'll say, well, even if you're an outcome-based person, an outcome is still only an interpretation of an event. When we pray for good outcomes, what you're praying for is a good interpretation of an event, a positive interpretation, because you could technically have a great outcome with a negative interpretation. And if you have a negative interpretation of a great outcome, the interpretation was the experience. We've been talking a lot about ownership and responsibility. And in this episode, we're starting to talk more about grace, but there is no grace until there is responsibility. There's always grace. Grace transcends responsibility, but the fact is our experience of grace does not become true to us until we acknowledge that we ourselves are capable of doing things we thought we were better than. And that's where we experience something that absolutely lifts you off the ground. I grieved a lot up here. I cried a lot up here. I sang a lot up here. I danced up here. For any of the reports about feral, undomesticated people in national forests, I apologize. I think it was a false report. The naked man running through the woods, I do apologize. That would have scared me too. I lost my mind up here. This place just held me. It gave me space to face those parts of myself that I was afraid of. I didn't think deserved love, but the reality is what we call our shadows, those are the most beautiful parts of ourselves that we simply have not extended grace towards. But to extend grace toward it, you have to look at it. Put the light on it. That's the only reason we call it a shadow, is because you just haven't put the light on it. Look at it. I'd like to invite everybody seriously watching this to embark on that journey of reconciling those parts of yourself that you are so completely afraid of. That part that you might even call a monster, that deserves no sympathy. I think you might only be saying that simply because you haven't looked at it in a while. That's what it means for strength to be made perfect in your weakness. My favorite verse, if I have one, is where sin increases, grace super abounds. Where sin increases, grace super abounds. In the most broken, shameful part of your life, that is where, just look at it. Just look at it. You're so beautiful. My brother, you're so beautiful, man. You're so beautiful. Even your anger is beautiful. Even your rage is beautiful. Even your sadness is beautiful. Your grief is beautiful. You are all together lovely. Which is why Your Brother Jamey is a show and a community for everybody that was called a monster. Ladies and gentlemen, calling all monsters. This podcast, the community that's being built through this, arms are wide open. I see the light in you. I see the light in you. Thank you for allowing me to share this place that is so sacred to me within limits that I've chosen. We all have the power to interpret our stories in an infinite amount of ways. And with that choice to interpret, we are given the opportunity to be creative with your life. You are given the opportunity to co-write your story. Every event is an opportunity for creativity. What story are you living? Not what story are we talking. What story are you living? We can start here by saying, you're living a great one. And in this moment, you're recognizing you have a choice of how you interpret this moment. And with that choice, you can't go wrong. There's not a right choice. Play with it. Allow that gumption to come up within yourself and say, no, I'm here to live a great story. I am living a great story. Better than a fantasy book. Better than any story you've ever heard, you've ever been told. That's the story I'm living. That every moment, it's not even like a movie, it's better than a movie. I'm your brother Jamey. This is season 1, episode 3. I'm gonna call it The Power of Interpretation. I love this place. Thank you for what you've given me. Thank you for the opportunity. Love you guys so much. Appreciate you. Thanks for watching.